Alrighty, so we're going to make some straight bindings. One of the questions that is often asked is, how wide do you cut your bindings? That is really dependent on what technique I'm going to use to bind with and what kind of fabric I have on the back. So this is a 2.5 inch binding, and this is 2 1/4. Now, if I am just doing cotton on cotton with a layer of thin cotton batting, I will go with a 2 1/4 binding because it tends to fill up the binding a little bit better than a 2.5. However, if I have either a double bat, a polyester bat that's thicker, or if I've got minky or something of the such on the back, then I like to go with the 2.5 inch binding because it gives me a little bit more wiggle room to get all the way around the thickness of that quilt. So, but it is really just a preference. I'll use a thinner one when I am putting it on and putting it on the front, spinning it to the back and hand stitching it. I like a thinner one. If I'm going to put it on the back, roll it to the front and machine stitch it, I will use the wider one. So really just whatever your preference is. There's no right or wrong answer. When I first started quilting, I used a 5 inch. It was amazing. It was it was a lot of fabric, and I ended up with 1 inch binding. And so it was kind of cool, but a little unnecessary unless you want the look of a nice wide binding. So anyway, we're going to play with this one first. So to attach your binding, it really is important to have your binding attached at an angle. And the reason for that is, let's pretend this is our binding and we have attached it straight. So we've sewn it on. You would have, well, let me get it this way. Let's say we have attached it here. So we have these two pieces right there. And now we're folding it out. So we already have 3 layers of fabric there. Then you're going to fold it in half to sew it down. So now you have 6 layers of fabric right there. You're going to sew it down. Then you're going to roll this around and sew it again. Now you have 12 layers of fabric right there. And as you're running your hands along it, you will see that that is quite a thick, bumpy spot. And it just makes for a lumpy binding. So if you are doing it with a bias binding, you have spread out those 12 layers of fabric over 2 inches, 3 inches worth. So it just makes a nicer binding, in my estimation. A little piece of sticky tape on the back of that. Okay, sorry. I get sidetracked by squirrels really easily. Okay, so if you notice, well, it's kind of hard to tell on this, but I have not cut off my selvage at this point. I leave it on there because it gives me a little bit of an assist here in a minute. So, one strip, you take your second strip, and you are going to lay it right sides together at a 45-degree angle. So they are perpendicular to each other. Now, here's my selvage on this one, and there's my selvage on that one. That gives me a nice little point here and a nice little point here that I'm aiming for. So you can pop a pin in there if you have trouble keeping it where you want it, kind of offset it a little bit. But it gets pretty easy to do it if you just kind of put them up like this. And then I take a ruler and whatever marking instrument you like. It's not going to show, so you can use anything. I just happen to have a black friction pen sitting here, so I'm going to use that. And you're going to draw a line from this point to that point. Being careful not to warp it out at the edges because you are dealing with a bias. So there's my line. Okay, and then we're going to sew right on that line. Right there. I'm going to take my pin out now that I've got it under my machine. Okay, and just sew right down that line. Now, this is the top one. Oh, there's another little piece of something. Okay, sorry. This is the one that's on top with the wrong side up. I'm going to take that one and I'm going to flip it over. So now it's right side up. And I'm going to take my next one and put it wrong side up on top of it, leaving the space for my selvages. Again, I will just take my ruler and my marker and sew right on that one. And just nesting that little point right at my needle. There we go. Again, it's wrong side up now. Flip it right side up. And add this one wrong side up. And when you get used to it, and if you have a good eye, you can, because it's a small area, you can eyeball it and not draw the line if you're comfortable with that. 6 to 1, half dozen to the other, whether you like to do that. Okay, and I'm keeping my line right on that point, and I'm going. So this is a shorter binding because it's going to be for a table runner, so I'm only using 4 strips. So at this point, I will cut it and cut them apart. Okay, so now we have a nice straight edge. We need to get rid of this business here. So cut up a little ways and just give it about 1/4 of an inch. You can do it with your rotary cutter if you want, or you can just do it with scissors. And I go through and I do the whole thing. Yes, just real quickly here, I'll get the other ones. There's only, when you do 4 strips, you only have three ends to cut. You always have one less than the amount of strips you do. How do you figure out how much binding you need? You measure the outside of your quilt, both the top and bottom and the sides. So figure out your top, one side, and add those together and then multiply by 2. And then the important part is to add an extra 20 inches just for turning corners, and you lose a little bit doing this. So, okay, I'm going to move my pressing mat up here so I can show you how we're going to press this baby. Now, remember, we did it on an angle so that we disperse all of the bulk out. So because of that, we don't really want to iron it all to one side because that's going to add more bulk to that one side. So we are going to get it open there. Trying to do it with my left hand. I'm not left-handed. Okay, kind of finger press that open and then give it a quick press with the iron. And now as we fold it, there is no spot here that has more than 3 layers at a time. So when we do our sewing and then fold it over, that is spread out through that entire time, and it just makes it a whole lot smoother of a binding. You don't get that little lump when you go along. So I must have had some. This is not tape. It's, I don't even remember what it's called. Hugo's Amazing Tape. That's what it's called. That you wrap around your spools to keep your threads from coming undone. And apparently I got some on the fabric. So finger press it open like that. And then the last one. When you use two hands, it goes a little bit easier. Give it a little finger press. Because this is on the bias, you don't want to just press it or it's going to stretch. So little finger press and down. All right. So it's already in one nice long strip. And then you're just going to go back through and press it in half, wrong sides together. Now, I typically would take this over to my big iron, but we're going to just do this. And I just sit and give it a little press, and you're ready to take it to your machine to sew. One of the things I do, I know that a lot of people will roll theirs onto a spool. When you're using large spools, that inner cone, when the spool is empty, people will wind their batting on or their binding onto that to keep it in a nice place. I tend to just take mine and just kind of accordion fold it like this. Then when I have it all done, I'll fold it one more time. And then I typically use adding machine tape to wrap around it, because then I can write on it what quilt it goes to and how long it is so that I can remember. And then if I have extras, I can wrap it back up in that. But so this is how I do it. And then I just drop this on the floor next to me, and it just feeds off really well. And I don't have to take the time to wrap it to a spool. I know that a lot of people love putting it on spools, and if that works for you, go for it. That's a great idea. This just is how I do it and how I carry on. So that is how you are going to do a straight binding. Next week, we will talk about doing a continuous bias binding. So when do you use a straight binding? Anytime your quilt is square or straight lines. You will sometimes, I did a Christmas tree skirt one time that had diamonds all the way around it. But those are straight seams, so I could use a straight binding. Anytime, as long as it is not a curvy edge of your quilt, you can do a straight binding. Now, that being said, there is a school of thought that says that a bias binding is a little more durable than a straight binding. I've never found that to be proved out to be true, but if you think it is, there is no reason you can't use a bias binding on everything if that's what you prefer. But this is just a much quicker, easier way to do things. So this is what I do. So I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions, you can always contact me through the website at customer care at thefabrichut.com, and I will get back to you as quickly as I can with any questions that you have. So I'm almost done here. See, even doing it in just little short spurts here doesn't take very long. And now I like to make my binding At the same time, I'm cutting my fabrics for a quilt. Now, really nice that any kit you get from the Fabric Hut comes with their binding already cut for you. It will be a 2.5-inch binding, so perfect size. But it will already be cut. But if I'm on my own quilt and like these table runners, I had to cut my own. So I like to cut it as I'm cutting all my fabric so that I don't forget what it is, and then that way it's all ready when I'm ready for it, even before I get my project quilted or anything. I've got my binding all ready to go, and I will put it in my project bin with that project and don't have to think about it again. So there we go. One set of binding ready for my table runner.